Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. I'm pleased to welcome back Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities. There's always lots to talk about when it comes to the economic situation, and Tom is always willing to oblige. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Tony.
I guess we should start with the current news, a new interest rate hike from the Bank of Canada. Is that a surprise to you at all?
A little bit of a surprise. I don't know that it's really relevant at this point in time. I think the Bank of Canada wants to feel they're doing something, and it kind of looks somewhat decisive, I guess. I don't know that it's really that important and that critical or even that necessary at this point. The challenge the banks, the central banks, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of Canada have is they're trying to tighten the system down, induce some pain, get the economy to slow down to contain inflation, which is a little bit like operating without anesthetic. But on the other hand, you have governments on the fiscal side just flushing the system with money and spending money. So you got your foot in the brake and the foot in the gas at the same time, and it's not working. Inflation, markets will tend to correct themselves over time. People will change spending habits or ease off in their spending if prices are going up too quickly. I did a paper at the graduate level in economics. There's not a business cycle that has not been exacerbated by central bank activities.
Interesting. So in this case, I guess their primary goal at this point is to try to reduce inflation. You're saying that's going to be a challenge for them as long as governments keep spending money the way they're doing.
Well, they're pulling in opposite directions, and the government is trying to ease any pain on people out there. And I'm not totally convinced that interest rates are the best way to do it. If you really want to slow the economy down, the government has to stop giving money away and spending money and forcing the Bank of Canada to print more money.
Right.
And that's the thing. You don't have to make everybody suffer. And by the way, if you increase mortgages, for example, I talked to a client recently, and she had a mortgage that was $3,000 a month. It's now gone to $4,000 a month. How is that easing inflation for that person? It's not.
Right. It's just increasing their cost of living for sure. So from your perspective, then, is this going to have, you seem to suggest that this will not have the impact that the Bank of Canada desires. Is it going to have a negative impact, though, on future spending habits or avoiding a recession, those kinds of things?
I don't know that it's going to be significant. We're at a level of been 4.5 to 4 3/4. The big increases have already occurred, and the impact of those increases has already happened. This is sort of gilding the lily, if you will, after the fact. I don't think it's critical either way. But you don't avoid recessions by increasing interest rates. You create recessions, which is the purpose of increasing interest rates. And that's why I alluded to the phrase operating without anesthetic. There are other ways to contain inflation, cut payments to special interest groups or the professional victim groups or any of these, ease off on some of your programs. One of the big inflationary things, like it or not, everything getting in the date of climate change is climate change. Tremendously inflationary, but nobody makes that connection because it doesn't fit with the narrative.
Right. One of the things you've been saying for months on my show is that you were optimistic when I was kind of talking down to the idea that we were going to be in a recession. So far, you've been more correct than I have been. There has been no recession. Is that the way you see things in the future, too?
Well, timing is everything, of course, Tony. So don't consider yourself wrong so far. I mean, I'm right so far. There's a lot of professional doomsters out there. And I mean, I have a friend of mine who's an economist, and he's predicted 12 of the last 2 recessions. And so in actual fact, numbers can prove anything. There's other things going on that are muting effects here, though. I think basically corporations are disconnecting, the economy is disconnecting from government. Government, whether it be in Canada and the United States, is viewed as a little bit of a soap opera, disconnected from economic growth, really interested in just buying votes by just splashing money around at anybody who's upset about something. So it's really the economy is looking at the economy, and business seems to be doing well. Job creation is still there, primarily in the United States. So it's going to be a while yet before we get into a full-blown recession. I'm
Right.
not even sure that we will.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He, of course, is chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom, you were talking before the break about government spending, and one of the things that's been in the news, of course, is looks like more government subsidies are on the way for Stellantis, the auto plant in Windsor. Your thoughts on this?
You know, I tend to think in a slightly different vein. We should have the kind of economy or governance, taxation, overall policies that automatically attracts business to want to be in Canada. Mm-hmm. We have a highly educated, creative, extremely bright workforce, great work ethic, great skill sets. The problem is our taxation system, and basically, make no mistake, governments are anti-corporate or anti-corporation. I mean, you have these little sparks where politicians want to say, look at these jobs we brought, this big thing, and that's all well and good because it gives them a chance to thump their chests and say, look at this, there's a project that I made happen. And that's great politics. But shouldn't we have the kind of environment where you really don't have to bribe people to come and set up plants in your economy? We have smart people. We have a great geographical location next to one of the biggest markets in the world, reasonably up until the last few years, a good international reputation. So my point here is we should have the kind of environment that people want to build and grow companies in, as opposed to, here's a couple of $1 billion. Would you please come and build a plant that I can be at the ribbon cutting ceremony? I'm not saying you don't have to give incentives from time to time, but I think we should look at it in a bigger picture. We should be the place you want to come to.
Yeah, and it seems that obviously we're competing against President Joe Biden and his massive subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act. Is there any? I mean, really, is it even possible to compete with the Americans on some of this?
They have more money to give away than we do, and they have tax jurisdictions, particularly in the southern states, that are extremely favorable. Very good living conditions. They're not freezing like we are for a good chunk of the year. So it's a lot easier to attract places to business to Atlanta, that type of thing, or Florida even. So it is difficult to compete. And remember, Americans really do consider America first. If they have a program that damages Canada, they couldn't care less about that. So they're not our friend when it comes to economic stuff. So yeah, we are in competition, but that encompasses the whole regime of lifestyle, living, where do you want your family to live, your kids to grow up, the schools, a whole bunch of stuff. Healthcare, that's an advantage we have, by the way, is healthcare.
Right.
But the disadvantage is our tax system and our pejorative attitude toward business in general, or a lack of understanding of business in general. So what I'm saying is we should broaden out our attractiveness on a bigger scale than just giveaways to build a showpiece plant to do, and batteries, electric vehicles. This is the flavor du jour for governments. You want to be seen doing something like that.
Yeah, and of course, there's always the question. The plant is one key component of a green energy policy, but you still have to have a supply chain that backs it up, right?
Yes, and listen. One of the reasons I think we're going more and more to electrical vehicles is simplicity. It really wins out at the end of the day. The jet engine, for example, has only one moving part. The fan, whereas a piston engine like the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine has, I don't know, something like 5,000 parts or whatever, a whole bunch of them moving and bashing around. Same with gasoline engines. Gasoline engines have, valves and all these things, whereas an electric engine just has one, swinging, basically, electric motor spinning around with magnetic field to it. So it's simple, it's easier to fix, easier to maintain, less servicing. So eventually we're going to go in that direction anyway. Charging and mileage are still going to be a problem though for a while.
Yeah, I thought people don't seem to realize that getting these charging stations and then what produces the electricity, we're going to need a lot more electricity in our grid to make sure that these cars can be charged, right?
Absolutely. And the mantra is, well, you can charge it at your home overnight. Well, that sounds good, but many of the electrical vehicle people tell you, do not charge your vehicle overnight. There's danger of a fire. So you might save in gas, but end up burning your house down. So there's not a simple panacea to this. Whenever we try to change the whole nature of an economy or the temperature or macro stuff like this, it really takes a while, and there's a lot of hiccups along the way. But we may get there, but the real key to me is the simplicity of the engine.
Indeed.
But all that infrastructure you refer to, it's not there. It
Yeah.
won't be there.
I think that's the key point as well. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom, wanted to talk to you about oil prices. I know you watch this very keenly, and of course, we had the recent news of Saudi Arabia cutting its production again. I think it's by 1 million barrels a day. Any thoughts on what's going on there?
Well, typically, wars of any variety are inflationary. It uses up all of human lives, it uses up material, and it uses fuel. But the way the game is being played out, and Russia is still getting their fuel out into the world markets. Saudi is trying to keep prices up, and they're no longer the friend of America. As MBS, Prince Mohammed bin Salman said, we're not interested in pleasing America anymore. Because America is saying, this is dirty stuff, it's terrible fuel, the Saudis are not dependable, and plus he's a murderer, et cetera, et cetera. And, to their minds, they say, well, they're slagging us, slagging our product. Why do we need to be friends with them? So that's why you're seeing this development all around the world. So far, we haven't seen the shortages we would have expected at this point, because Russia's flooding the world wherever they can. They got to pay for this war. It could be ironic that fuel prices go up when the war ends. It should be the other way around, but it might go up when it ends. And theoretically, it's going to end at some juncture. We're all waiting for this great big offensive, which may or may not happen. But I think oil prices are going to remain firm with a slight skew on the upside, because you can't inhibit new investment by banks. Can't make, for example, the Royal Bank is being targeted as making dirty oil loans kind of thing. So they don't like bad press. So what they're going to do is they're cutting loans for exploitation. So, having mastered economics 101, if you cut supply and the demand stays the same, the price goes up. And I don't think you have to be any deeper than that when you look at oil prices. We're cutting supply and the demand is not going down. The third world, the emerging world, they couldn't care less about the things that we are concerned about in North America or in Europe. They're going to be burning gas for a long time.
Yeah, and indeed, and obviously Saudi is always the price maker, so that's not surprising. Obviously, the other big news item in the last few weeks in Canada has been the Alberta election. That obviously has a connection to our natural resources and oil and gas and so on. Any thoughts coming out of that election?
Well, there is I noticed Marc Lalonde passed away he was the energy minister under Trudeau the first, and put in the national energy policy. The West has always felt they were being badly treated by the East. And that's based in fact. They always have done. You got Quebec won't buy Alberta oil, but they get equalization payments because of the oil. But they want to buy their stuff from Venezuela, even though you got ships going aground in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But there is still this hostility. It's not going to, there's this talk about separation. That's not going to happen. But there's this hostility. It'll be interesting to see how the government there manages this relationship with Ottawa, because unfortunately, Ottawa is in a mind lock about climate change, nothing else. Oh, that and LBGT rights. That's their only focus. And they've got to come to the fact that we are a country. We have to work together. And this is a very important part of Canada. It's a part of maintaining the value of our dollar, our energy exports. And even though they've been delinquent in allowing us to build pipelines, like it or not, hydrocarbons are going to be a human fact of life for the rest of my time and probably your time as well. I have a shorter time than you.
Well, not that much shorter. That much shorter. Uh, uh, Obviously, Danielle Smith returns as Premier of Alberta, a former host of a program here at the News Forum. And she, on election
You're not
night,
going back into politics, are you?
no, I can assure you, I'll let her do the heavy lifting there. But she said on election night that she's going to take it to Justin Trudeau on some of these issues. So I guess the one of the pressure points is the carbon tax and some of the other policies that Mr. Trudeau is pursuing.
Well, the carbon tax is terrible, absolutely terrible. Every single homeowner in Canada is paying 50 to 80 or $100 a month for carbon tax. But we live in Canada. We want to stay warm. And they talk about cost of living. $50 a month isn't going to kill me. I can handle that. But there are a lot of people, it is a lot of money too. And he talks about helping, poor people that don't have the funds to do stuff. And that's a regressive tax, and it should be taken off immediately. But we are being taxed at a regressive level, particularly people who are having a tough time. And it's wrong. It's just morally wrong.
We're going to just take a brief break. Tom, we'll be back with you. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a great conversation with Thomas Caldwell. He's chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom, just on your last point, obviously as you said, one of the big things that the federal government seems to be focused on is its quest to lower CO2 emissions. And yet we've got other countries like Russia and China and India who continue to increase their CO2 emissions. Does anything that Canada do, does it actually make a difference?
No, I mean, we're roughly, give or take, 1% of carbon emissions. If we cut all our economic activity in half, we cut it by half of 1%. And, I've been interested in a lot of the newspaper stuff we've seen recently is about colonialism. Well, climate change is a form of colonialism. We are forcing our views on less developed parts of the world. Part like South America, Southeast Asia, India, Russia, China. These people want a better standard of living. And we're saying, oh, no, you have to adhere to our rules. These are the rules that we, the rich North American and European economies, have decided. And so I think it really is a form of colonialism, if you will. It's possibly even a form of racism, like it or not, because it's the white, prosperous European and North American nations that are trying to impose this on the rest of the world, because this is our new flavor du jour. On and on, I don't think the rest of the world is going to buy into it. They want a better standard of living for themselves and their children, and that's right to do it. But for us, we're fooling around with this game, debasing our economies, and really not thinking of what it's doing to other parts of the world, the damage it's causing them. And we're in this great sense of parsimonious, we're so pure. But what is your purity costing other people? And I think that's something we have to start thinking about, because they're not going to adhere to this, and we're not going to change the temperature of the world. Let's try to deal with poverty, hunger, homelessness. Let's try to deal with those things. Those are more at home. We can get a shot at those. We're not going to change the temperature of the world, period. And
Yeah, no, I hear you, and indeed, those voices coming from what's now called the global South are saying those things, and there seems to be a really big disconnect between Europe and North America and these countries that seems to be growing, and it actually geopolitically helps Russia and China, doesn't it?
Sure. These folks aren't listening to us anymore, and there's part of a bigger problem too. As you know, I'm in the investment business. This whole concept of these big issues is really anti-corporate, if you will. It's interesting, corporations now have to address, people who consider themselves stakeholders. That is, not shareholders, not employees, not customers, but this is how you should run your company to fit in with our ideas of the world. Mm-hmm. And it really is a depressant effect on economies, generally speaking, whether it be environmental, social, and governance, or whatever, or all the current flavor du jours of how everyone else should run their lives. So I think we have to really stop and think, what is the damage we're doing to others? What's the damage we're doing to ourselves? What's the reward, the benefit, cost benefit analysis of this thing? But you cannot have a discussion of this because it's so political.
Right.
And if you come out against the current mantra, if you're in academia, you're going to lose your job. So it really is a political issue that we're dealing with now. And it's the intrusion of the ideologues into the rest of the world of how we should live our lives. And we're seeing more and more and more of that in a wide spectrum of topics. And I think that's one of the big dangers in the Western world.
Right.
Maybe we don't have enough to worry about, so we create stuff.
Well, and we got a less than a minute left, but this is part of the problem in that, let's say you're a law firm that has a diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, and you say, what has that got to do with the practice of law? Well, they would come back and say, our clients are demanding it because they themselves have diversity and equity and inclusion departments who say that that they can't employ the law firm unless the law firm adheres to that agenda. So there is a problem in corporate North America on this.
Well, let's use a simple example. If I look at our company, we did a survey of people who are brand new Canadians or first generation Canadians in our company. I'm first generation. But it was 70% are either first generation or brand new Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
This firm is probably one of the most diverse in the securities industry. We don't have a diversity policy. We hire the best people we can, and the diversity takes care of itself. And I would not want to be hired at any job if I was hired on the basis of my skin color or anything else. I want to be hired because I'm good at what I do and I want to get better at what I do.
On that note, the time is up, but probably a topic we can also discuss next time. So Thomas Caldwell,
Absolutely.
Thanks for being on the program today.